Welcome back. Now that we have created Cosmos DB account, let's create the database and the container. In order to do that, you can select the Data Explorer from the top menu here, and then you've got the option to create a new container. As you can see here, that will also give you the option to create a new database. Or if you want to create just a database, you click on the drop-down and then click on the new database. Let's do that, and I'm going to call my database as the NYC Taxi DB. Again, by clicking the provision throughput here, you say that you want to share the throughput across all your collections in this database, which is fine for us. We are only going to have one collection, so let's leave that as ticked. And now we need to specify the throughput. Again, you've got two options here. You can either auto-scale or you can set a manual value. But by clicking on the manual, you can specify what the RU you want to use for our project. Say, for example, if it's 400, you just specify that value and that will be provisioned throughout. But you can auto-scale by adding auto-scale, you can save some cost. For example, if you specify that your max RUs is 1000, it's going to start from 100 RUs, which is 10% of the maximum value, and then it be scaled up to 1000 RUs depending on your workload. In this way you're going to be saving cost because it's starting from a lower value. As you know, I've got the free tier applied to the Cosmos DB account. I've got the first 1000 RUs for free. So I'm going to specify this as 1000, and I'm not going to incur any additional charge. But if you don't have a free tier applied to your Cosmos DB account, please be mindful of the cost because it can add up. As you can see, if you are using 1000 RUs, then it will cost this much. So if you don't have a free tier, I can specify 400, which is sufficient for our project, and then just delete the Cosmos DB database as soon as you've finished your project. So let me click OK. And that will create the database for us. Now that we've got our database, we need to create the container. So let's click on the table next to the database name and click on New Container. And as you can see here, it's using the existing database, which is NYC Taxi DB, and we need to specify the container identifier. So I'm going to call this Heartbeat because, as we discussed, that's the data we're going to load here, and we can leave the indexing as automatic. We need to specify the partition key next. Let me walk you through the data first so that you understand actually what attributes we got in our data, and then we can pick a partition key. So let me go over to my text file. As you can see here, I've got around 5 JSON objects here which are totally made up by me. This data is not provisioned by the NYC Taxi Data Company. I've just come up with the data so that I can demonstrate the use of Synapse Link in our project. So let me walk you through those. The first attribute I've got is driver ID, which is a unique identifier for each of the drivers. And then I've got an object here called hire, which will tell us whether the taxi is currently on here or it's available for here, and then we've got the distance to destination. So this is basically from where the taxi is. How far is the destination in miles? For example, you can talk in kilometers, and we've got the time to destination in minutes as well. In this case, it's 22 minutes to get to the destination. This information kind of helps the support staff to identify when the taxi can take the next hire, for example, and which location it can take it from as well. And then we got the device identifier. That's again a unique identifier for each of the devices, and we've got the timestamps. So this is when the heartbeat event basically fired and gave us the JSON message here, and we got the device location. So that's got the latitude and longitude that kind of tells you where the taxi currently is, and you've got the destination location. So that's where the taxi is going to get to. They've got all of this information. So using, for example, the device location and the destination location, you can plot all the taxis on a dashboard and monitor those as well. So which is pretty good. And as I said, I've got 5 different messages here. And again, as these are made up by me, please be inventive and add any other attributes you may think could be useful for when you come to report on this data. But I'm just going to go with this. We need to pick the partition key. There are multiple criteria that you can use to pick your partition keys in Cosmos DB. We're not going to go deep into that. But generally, a partition key is a key which has got a high cardinality so that Cosmos DB can distribute the data and distribute the workload as well. So we'll pick one of the IDs. I'm going to go for the device ID, so that's got a high cardinality in our data. So let's put the device ID here as our partition key, and we can specify the unique case if we wanted to, but we can leave that out. And this is the important thing here, which is the analytical store. We got this option available here just because we enabled Synapse Link. So that gives us the ability to push the data from a transactional store to the analytical store, I should say, replicate the data from transactional store to the analytical store. If you leave that as off, then nothing will be replicated. But we want to replicate the data into our analytical store. That is the whole purpose of this section of the course. So let me click on and then click OK. So the container will be created now. The container is now created. So let me expand that. And as you can see, you've got a few options here. So you've got the items, which lists all the items within the container. We don't have any at the moment, and settings lets you set your time to leave information for the transaction store as well as an identical store. And you can create stored procedures, user-defined functions and triggers and things like that. We're not going to go into any of these things, but let's go to items. And as you can see here at the moment, there are no items. Let's add some data. So let's add 2 records, and then we can see them in the analytical store. So let me click on New Items, and it gives you some default information. I'm going to take that off, and I'm going to copy the data I've got here, and I'm going to copy the first JSON object here. As you can see, this is what we got here, and then you click on Save. So my first record's now been inserted, and as you can see, that's been listed here as well with the partition key being shown and the ID. So there are a couple of other attributes added by Cosmos DB. They didn't come from us, they give us a unique ID and the row identifier and things like that. But this data, remember, is going into the transactional store. That data is not in the analytical store. We can't physically see the data in analytical store. We know that actually that data replicated goes into another blob storage, but we can't go into a storage explorer and browse to that data as it doesn't make it available for us. But we can use things like Synapse to access that data in the analytical store. That's what we'll do. But before that, let's add one more record before we finish this session. So again, don't just paste it here, because if you paste it here, that will be treated as an update. I'm going to click on the new item, and then I'm going to just paste the second record here and then click Save. So we've now got 2 records here. So you've got the query here, which is select store from C. What that says is select store from the container. That's what it is. You can also run SQL queries in your Cosmos DB generally. So in order to do that, you come over to the new SQL query and then run your query. For example, select star from C is going to select all the data from our container. You can specify your where clause and all of those things. So that's everything I wanted to show you here. We've got the 2 records, as you can see, within our heartbeat data. So if I click on items, that would show us the 2 records, and we want to see them in the analytical store and query from there. So that's what we are going to do in that next session. So see you in the next session.